We start with several big stories out of the White House. First, the world is waking up to sweeping global tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump. Trump vows the historic tariffs will transform the U.S. economy. Effective today, more than 60 countries are facing steep levies for goods brought into the U.S. Deals with key trading partners, China and Mexico, are still pending. The president says his policy will bring billions in revenue and foreign investments, but critics say tariff uncertainty has already inflicted higher prices and a weaker jobs market on the U.S. economy. And for the first time in his second term, President Trump may soon come face to face with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin says the U.S. and Russia have agreed on a summit between the two leaders as soon as next week. Meanwhile, the White House says the president is open to a summit with the leaders of both Russia and Ukraine. CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro is joining us live right now from the White House. Aaron, thank you for your time today. Let's start with those tariffs we talked about. Trump is counting on these tariffs to boost the U.S. economy, but is the administration concerned at all about the negative impact they've had so far?
Yeah, Mugo, at least not publicly, though they do have their arguments when asked about that. They continue to insist the tariffs have not caused or raised inflation so far. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent also repeated the belief that it'll be manufacturers abroad as well as retailers that will absorb the costs of these tariffs and that it will not be passed down to consumers on a large scale. You also saw Bessent claim a projection of $300 billion more in new revenue from these tariffs, up from $77 billion in 2024. And we're also learning a bit more about the caveats within this whole tariff plan. You heard from President Trump yesterday, Bessent today, talk about how companies who make commitments to bring manufacturing inside the United States, especially when it comes to those crucial semiconductor chips for smartphones and laptops, may not be subject to these global tariffs as they take the time to relocate.
So the Kremlin says President Trump will have face-to-face talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The president was asked the question yesterday about the summit with Putin and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Here's what he had to say.
Well, there's a very good prospect that they will. And we haven't determined where, but we had some very good talks with President Putin today. And there's a very good chance that we could be ending the round, ending the end of that road. That road was long and continues to be long, but there's a good chance that there will be a meeting very soon.
So, Aaron, any further details from the White House on a timing of a possible meeting with President Putin?
Yeah, the White House maintains at this moment that no date or location has been set for a meeting, refuting what the Kremlin put out overnight, saying that the bilateral meeting could happen as soon as next week. That does not mean there is not planning, of course, for a potential meeting. As you heard President Trump kind of voice some optimism that a meeting could happen, quote, very soon. But you also heard him say that he could also be a little bit skeptical, saying that he's been led down the path by Putin before that has not panned out. Should this meeting take place, it's the first face-to-face meeting between the presidents of U.S. and Russia since 2021, when President Biden met with President Putin in Geneva. And the news of this potential meeting between Trump and Putin comes after a meeting between Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy, and Russian officials in Moscow yesterday, and before tomorrow, where it's expected the U.S. will place large secondary sanctions on Russia, as well as countries that do business with Russia.
Okay, Aaron, I want to pivot to a different question here about the census, because the president has ordered changes to the census, and we know it could have a major impact on how a population is actually counted. Can he order those changes, and what exactly does he want to see happen?
Yeah, the changes specifically instructing the Commerce Department, which does oversee the census, in terms of what he specifically wants. It seems like one of the goals is to introduce a question on citizenship in the census. This is something he pushed for in 2019 that was ultimately unsuccessful. The Supreme Court rejected it, and there wasn't enough time for the Trump administration in his first term to appeal and get that question in before the 2020 census. This time there may be a longer runway. And the other bit about how he wants it to happen now is a potential violation of the Constitution, in part because that says the census must happen every 10 years. And it seems like anything that would change the census now, such as a citizenship question, is unlikely to be finalized before the 2026 midterms. That's why you're seeing a lot of focus from the administration and Republicans on this other process known as redistricting.
Okay. Aaron Navarro at the White House for us today. Thank you so much for your reporting.